in a ways, continue with what I've talked about on Monday, the autonomous vessels and the implications of the new technology that is being introduced slowly into the different kinds of modules of transportation, with perhaps a more focused approach towards the issues of potential responsibility, with having in mind the entrance of new players into the market and their potential role they might play in the scheme of liability scheme. As was noted on Monday, I know that some of you weren't here, so it makes sense to repeat everything. As was noted on Monday, the IMO has been discussing the advent of autonomous vessels for a number of years now. And one of the results, or rather the latest result of these discussions, is a set of principles that the joint working group formed at IMO to discuss these matters has come up with when it ponders the possibility of regulating certain aspects of autonomous vessels. And I've singled out three major points that were discussed within the IMO and that was considered by the majority of the delegations as the principles that should be adhered to when regulating the autonomous vessels. There should be, first of all, a human master responsible for a mass, meaning, in other words, that the IMO believes in the core principles that the human captain, human master should be behind the responsibility scheme. Second, they recognize the fact that it's perhaps no longer necessary that a human master at all times should be present at the vessel, and therefore it's possible to consider remote operations. And third, the human master, no matter if they're on board or off board on shore in a remote center, should have the capacity to intervene when necessary. And what I intend to do is I intend to show by using the comparative method that some of these things are either no longer it needs to be discussed as if something like this is possible in the first place. And the second thing is I believe that some of the things are not taking into consideration the advent of technology and what the technology brings. Why do I say this? I believe that with the appearance of different kinds of systems that aid in autonomous navigation, the role of manufacturers and the so-called back-end operators will increase and has already increased. The back-end operators are companies, sometimes producers, manufacturers, sometimes third companies that remain in a digital network connection with the product. In this case, we're talking about ships. So all the systems on ships, like the operating systems that are used to run certain parts of the equipment, technological equipment, navigation, GPS included, sensors that are used to collect data on the surroundings and to enhance the situational awareness of the seafarers, of the crew. All of these items, they require regular updates, cybersecurity, network interconnectivity between the onboard systems, etc., etc. And most of these things are not handled by the companies or the ship operators themselves. Rather, they are handled by third-party service providers, who are very often producers of this equipment, or specialized companies that service this sort of equipment and make sure that this sort of equipment is regularly updated, not in the hardware sense, but in the software sense. Absent of this connection and this serviceability, the product as such, whether we're talking about a singular piece of equipment installed on a ship or a ship as a whole, lose their functionality and are no longer a product that one has purchased when considering a new shipbuilding or buying a already existing ship from the market. So are there any examples where an AI system operator producer has taken responsibility of damage is the first question that I'll be asking. The second, are there any exampple where a vehicle in operation has the capacity without a human to intervene? Is there an example where a vehicle that is equipped with some sort of a system that aids in control of this vehicle is able to operate without any human intervention at any given time? And third question, are there any examples where human intervention is impossible as such? If the answer to these questions is true, then perhaps the IMO's approach might not be in line with what other modes of transportations have done. How do I make this comparative analysis? I'm looking into non-maritime law legislation that I believe is worth considering because they're faced with same issues, I'm of course talking about drones in the airs and autonomous systems utilized in motor vehicles that are being constructed as we speak, and the legislative efforts that have been made in that sense. I will only be focusing on road and motor vehicles. And on the other side, I'll be focusing on other kinds of legislation that is upcoming as well, not in force yet, but it is relevant when we discuss the use of algorithms, the so-called artificial intelligence, although no artificial intelligence as such exists, but the impact of these algorithms when it comes to decision-making that is automated and that can handle systems like the navigational systems or the driving systems in motor vehicles. Finally, I'll be looking very briefly into the matter of changing the European law in terms of the product liability directive that is from the first part of the 90s that is now about to be changed, having in mind the impact of digital equipment, digital connectivity, and digital products we're witnessing today in mostly almost every smart device that is out there. The relevant international law is, of course, the 1968 Vienna Convention on Road Traffic. For 50 plus years, the core principle of the Vienna Convention and the preceding convention from the 20s was that the human driver should be the principally responsible person. Human driver has to hold the wheels and has to be made responsible for everything that is arising out of the so-called dynamic control over the vehicle, meaning control over the vehicle while the vehicle is in operation. However, during the last 5 to 6 years, they've made two major amendments to the Vienna Convention, the international framework for any kind of accidents and liability rising out of accidents in road traffic, where they have introduced so-called vehicle systems that are used to aid the drivers in performing certain functions of the motor vehicle operation, and as well as automated driving systems that are capable of no longer requiring a human to operate the vehicle and control the vehicle, but are rather able to control the vehicle on their own to a certain level. The way that they've done this is they said that as long as these systems are in technical compliance with international standards, I'm not going to go into this, there's no time, but these are the so-called Geneva agreements and various kinds of ISO and other related standards, then they can be considered to be on the same level as a driver, rather they're recognized as a human driver. Even if they do not necessarily comply with international standards, predominantly the reason why is because usually when we talk about the latest technology, there are no such standards, then it is up to the national domestic law, or rather the jurisdiction, to consider whether these sort of systems will be allowed in modern vehicles. We are talking about level 3 and level 4 semi-automated driving. Some of you who were here in Dubrovnik on Monday will probably remember that I've briefly talked about these different levels of driving, automated driving. In short, level 3 is something that you can, for example, see in Germany and France on their highways. When you enter the highway, you press a button in your car, and the car drives you to the exit point which you have nominated in the navigation system. The car is able to handle most common features on the highway, like crossing the lanes, using signal lights, etc., etc. But if there is an emergency, such as a road congestion or a road accident, then the system will ask the driver to take over the control of the vehicle. Level 4 is capable of handling these sort of things as well. Level 4 is capable of driving around the city in a number of cities in different parts of the world: Asia, China, America, United States. They're now even performing taxi services. They are remotely operated by means of remote operators being able to take control of the vehicle in case there's something goes wrong, and often it does. But in principle, these taxis drive on their own. It's not full automation yet, but it's very close to this, although some are saying that level 5 will be a thing that will be very difficult to be achieved in the end. When it comes to the implications of this technology on the road sector in terms of how things are regulated on in a national law, we have a number of examples right now. I'm sticking to the European examples, whereby they are now introducing legislation that requires the shared responsibility between the owners of the vehicle, producers, and in some cases even the insurers, who are mandated by strict liability to offer mandatory liability insurance to the producers as well as owners. And then in some cases, we even have the responsibility of automated driving system operators and manufacturers, such as the French criminal law I mentioned this on Monday. In case where one can prove the fault on the side of the system, therefore meaning that the system has done something erroneous, and therefore because of this has caused the accident, the producer could be held liable for damage and could be claimed against directly rather than going through the owner and then recourse. So are there any examples where it's possible to consider that other persons except the owner of the vehicle could be held responsible? Yes, we've seen this happening in the road sector already, and so we can anticipate that it's possible to introduce such legislative changes in the maritime sector as well. What about the second question? Are there any situations concerning this new technology where it's no longer possible for humans to take over the control? Well, I don't have the time. I was planning to go through all of these points that you can see on the screen individually, but I will only stick to the emergency maneuver point, meaning that when it comes to so-called unplanned events, where those who have coded the algorithm to be able to handle the system on its own the algorithm decided that the system is no longer capable of resolving the issue themselves, they will require, or rather offer the transition demand to the driver, hope the driver will be able to take control over the vehicle. How is this done in practice? When you look at your latest models of, certain models of Mercedes-Benz or BMW or other cars, you will be able to see that they have introduced a plethora of sensors that are in the car and they're looking at the driver, trying to determine whether the driver has the capacity of taking over the control instantly, meaning whether the driver is looking onto the road, they're measuring the position of the eyes, different parts of the eye, they're looking at the position of the head, the position of the hands, whether the driver is holding on the steering wheel or not, and other factors as well. And then within a time frame of 5, 10, 15 seconds, the system decides whether the driver is capable of taking over the command of the vehicle, whether the motor vehicle should be excluded from the traffic. Therefore, why is there a need for such a brief period of time? Because the system calculates the amount of time necessary to successfully exclude itself from the traffic without causing any road accidents. And therefore, it's often the case when one looks into the current practice of the number of companies that have such systems implemented into their cars, is that usually the amount of time available doesn't allow the human drivers to take the command because they're not able to comprehend the situational awareness at that particular point. So the systems usually exclude do the maneuver that requires the car to leave the motor lane and try to get out of the traffic. So yes, to answer the question, there are examples where the humans are simply not able to intervene in time, which again brings us to the point, rather the question of whether it's possible, whether it makes sense to hold masters of a ship responsible for events that take place at the point where a ship is positioned somewhere, let's say in the mid of the Atlantic, and the master is in the remote operational center somewhere in the UK. Is it fair to expect that the human master operating several thousand kilometers away will be able to take the decision instantly, or whether sometimes we have to accept the fact that it's up to the system to make the call because there is no other viable solution? Finally, product liability and makers, so-called makers in the context of the maritime law and the shipbuilding. Producers are more and more becoming service providers because the products, as said in the introduction, products they create are simply so complex that they require constant care and upgrade from the manufacturers. Meaning that if you have purchased a smart vehicle, that smart vehicle has digital components that require internet connection, if you like, and they require the connection with their producer to be able to get regular updates on their system, let alone the cybersecurity issues. I'm not even going into that topic right now. If without this, if there is no such continuous service, if the service is interrupted, whether permanently or briefly, there is no connection with the product, and therefore the product, and I read out from the slide, fails to provide the expected results and quality. And in lines with what the Commission has proposed in terms of the amendments to the current directive from the 90s, they're now saying that this would equal the notion of a defective product. Right now, you have a number of months before you have until you have the ability to claim against the producer for a faulty product, and that's it. In this new vision of the product liability law, you will be able to claim for a faulty product throughout the duration of the product's life, as it anticipated in the purchase contract. So therefore, the producers are now becoming back-end operators. And in the context of autonomous navigational or driving technology, we have to take into consideration that if the vehicle is capable of navigating itself, if the vessel is capable of navigating itself, it has to have at its disposal a full array of sensors and other kind of equipment, radars, that will be able to tell the vessel, what's happening in its surroundings, and then it has to have the capacity to run all the systems on board equipment installed into the ship. And a combination of the huge amount of data that is coming in requires the algorithms to make the decisions themselves in a number of situations. So therefore, the operation of these algorithms and operation of this technology, these systems, the sensors, and everything connected, primarily depends on their functionability. And the functionability is what is very often the case, no longer something that the shipping company itself can guarantee, but rather the producers of this equipment. So at what point, until what point are we still prepared to hold the owner, the company that owns the vessel, responsible for something that they literally have nothing to do with? And that brings to mind the question of seaworthiness of the vessel in the AI age, meaning to what extent will one require from the owner due diligence in terms of the seaworthiness of a vessel that is run by such systems that are in fact run by third companies? At what point do we consider reconsidering the seaworthiness to introduce the producers as well? That is perhaps one of the questions that could be asked as well. So the artificial intelligence, what are we talking about? And now I will try to finish in a few minutes. The way that the EU Commission has drafted the definition is that they made it very simple. They tried to make it as simple as possible. I've taken bits and parts of the definition here, and it primarily reflects the software that can generate outputs, such as, among other items, predictions or decisions influencing the environments they interact with. So we have to expect that these systems on board the vessels will make decisions concerning navigation on their own without human input or pre-approval. This is a risk-based approach, meaning that the more riskier the decision-making of the algorithm is to the interests of people, third parties, life, property, the higher risk base it becomes. And when we talk about shipping, this is the highest risk. And therefore, when we consider general legislation that the EU AI Act will become, those who operate these systems, meaning in the context of maritime, the owners will have to have a number of systems on board: risk management, data governance, record keeping, human oversight when and if and when possible. And all of these systems are unlikely to be run by owners themselves, but rather by third parties who are specialized in this kind of technology. And many of these systems on their own will require back-end operators who will be able to run them and make sure that they're operational. Let alone the questions of data training that is crucial in terms of decision-making at the points when the ships are navigating on their own. We're talking about ocean voyages, obviously. The whole point of the introduction of the technology into the vessels was to reduce the number of seafarers or eliminate seafarers, making it cheaper for the companies to run the ships, at the same time making sure that everything is safe. There is a general promise that the AI-driven ships and cars will be accident-free. So far, that is not the case. Maybe in the future it will be, but in any case, the question is, how do we know that the algorithm that makes the decisions is trained sufficiently, so we can say that it's trained as if a seafarer is being trained in running operating the ship. In any case, are there any examples where human intervention is impossible? Think about ocean voyages. This is more than likely the case. Also think about congested areas where it's necessary to make instant decisions, where it will be very difficult for a remote operator to make such an instant decision. I'm not going to talk about coal rigs because I've talked about this already. So to conclude, what do I think? How do I feel about the IMO's position that whatever the regulation would be, it will have to have a human master nominated as the principal responsible person. Is this true even if he has no means to connect to the vessel or navigate the vessel? I mean, do we really want to push this on the masters, therefore owners or ship operators? What if the vessel acts autonomously based on the products and services provided entirely by third parties? Is it still fair to strictly and exclusively reserve this responsibility on the owner, or should we consider, at least in some cases, extending responsibility to other parties as well? Master may not need to be on the board. The whole point of fully autonomous vessels is to allow this possibility I just said of not having any crew whatsoever. Some vessels may carry the so-called technical supervisors. In Germany, level 4, driving around the city, you are required by law to have a technical supervisor in the motor vehicle in case something goes wrong. This is likely something that we will see on ships as well, at least for a number of years while testing is being performed. And then finally, should have means the human master must, should, shall. They said should, so perhaps they're a little less convinced this is true for all cases. Should have the means to intervene when necessary. This may not always be possible because sometimes it will be very difficult to get in contact with the vessel, even if the vessel is not that far away from the coast. Sometimes the equipment, the satellite connection doesn't work. And must such, I have to ask myself as a lawyer in terms of the triggering of liability, should this be an instant trigger for a breach of master's obligation, or should we have some sort of exoneration exemptions there as well? And with this, I will conclude my sincere apologies for not being able to be with you in person. That was indeed my plan. I have to go now,